begin with our final lesson on Peter's first letter. And you can see, we have my wonderful artwork that I worked very hard on all day for this slide. So, oh no, I didn't draw it. I can't lie. So we're in 1 Peter, and we know that this book has been written to Jewish Christians in the dispersion in the sort of northern and central region of what is modern-day Turkey. And these Jewish Christians are being persecuted for their faith in Jesus Christ, and therefore they're struggling. And so we see in Peter's letter a message of hope, of endurance, of faith. Peter is known as the apostle of hope, because that's what he wants to give to all those Christians that are in his charge, that are looking to him for leadership. He wants to give them hope in this time of suffering. Not hope right now, because really, what is there right now but suffering? Our hope is in the next life. Our hope is in our reward in the next life, where we can follow Jesus in the course that he went. That is the way of suffering. And we see in his letter, as we've gone through these chapters, Peter's addressing certain groups. In the beginning of the letter, he specifically addresses families, right? Fathers, respect your wives. Wives, respect your husband. Children, obey your parents, and so on and so on and so on. And finally, we get to this last section in chapter 5, where he addresses the elders. He says, I appeal to you, elders. Now, the word for elder, what's translated here, is the Greek word presbyteros, which is translated to presbyter, right? And this is where we get the name for priest. And he says, presbyters exercise episkopuntes, which is a very, should be a familiar letter, or a familiar word to us. It's where we get the term episcopal. Episkopos means oversight or overseer. So, elders exercise oversight over your brothers and sisters in Christ. And this is sort of where we get this early first century idea of the hierarchy of clergy. Are y'all tracking? So, in the Gospels, we have Jesus' 12 disciples who are called apostles, right? And apostles are those who are sent out to spread the gospel. And after Jesus, that is exactly what they do. They are sent out into the world to proclaim the message of Jesus Christ died and risen from the dead. And as they bring this message to surrounding regions, and it starts in Jerusalem, of course, they plant in those churches that get set up elders. Elders, or overseers, in this respect, to basically care for the flock in that area. And so, in the first century, at the time of Peter's writing, episkopos and presbyteros, bishop and priest, are synonymous at this point. The bishop is the priest. The overseer is the elder. And then we see sort of a delineation happen in the book of Acts, where the apostles are so busy caring for the poor and the needy in Jerusalem, those Christians, they say, we don't have any time to preach the gospel, to do what we were meant to do. Therefore, let us set aside people who can specialize in this ministry to the poor and to the sick. And so they selected, was it 8 deacons? I may be wrong. But they selected deacons that would exercise this ministry and their authority. And this was the job of the deacon, to feed the poor and to care for the Christian community, so that the bishop or elder or episkopos could preach the gospel. And of course, as the church grew and grew and grew, the apostles couldn't reach every church. These bishops couldn't reach every church on a Sunday to celebrate the Eucharist, as was their duty. And so they appointed elders to work in their stead. And this is what became of our modern conception of the Christian priesthood. Priests who act on the bishop's authority to celebrate the Eucharist. As a priest, apart from my bishop, I cannot celebrate the Eucharist. I cannot act in any sort of sacramental function because my authority comes from him, which comes from Jesus Christ. Are y'all following? And so we have the development of a threefold ministry of deacons, priests, and bishops. Those guys should look familiar, shouldn't they? That's our new bishop, Bishop Reed, and our former beloved bishop, Bishop Eicher. And so, Peter is addressing the elders, or priests, in this region of Galatia and Cappadocia up in northern Turkey, saying, be faithful in your oversight. And this reading, this very first part of 1 Peter chapter 5, is actually read at every ordination ceremony. As a reminder, I'll read just a little bit. So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is to be revealed. Tend the flock of God that is in your charge. Tend the flock. That is what we are commissioned to do at every priest's ordination. And we're asked the question, will you undertake to be a faithful pastor to all whom you are called to serve, laboring together with them and with your fellow ministers to build up the family of God? Notice how this sort of oversight is to be accomplished. Through service and laboring together. And this is what Peter is going to lay out in our next few verses on what to do. So here is a famous painting called The Sacrament of Ordination, and I'm pretty sure this is in the Kimball Art Museum. Very famous old painting of Jesus handing the keys of heaven to St. Peter himself. So Peter, who himself received his authority from Christ, is now conferring it to these elders and encouraging them to be faithful in their ministry despite their current sufferings, despite their current trials. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. A guy named Occamenius once wrote that as he is proposing to talk about modesty, the apostle refers to himself here as a fellow elder, by which he means that he is one among many other elders. In saying this, he is either referring to his age or to the office of bishops, for bishops and elders were one and the same at this period. So he's saying, guys, I'm one of you. I'm encouraging you just as I also need encouragement to be faithful to our calling. Be faithful to the calling to which you have received. That's what Paul says in the 3rd chapter of Ephesians. And basically, Peter is repeating that in a different way, saying, be faithful. To continue that quote, when he wants to reveal his dignity and point out that it is from modesty that he refers to himself as a fellow elder, he mentions that he was a witness of Christ's suffering. The point of this is to say that if he, who has so great an honor, does not mind referring to himself as a fellow elder among them, they too must not exalt themselves in the presence of those who serve in various offices. So, Peter is saying, that he is a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is to be revealed. Peter is Peter. He's a big deal. He's sort of like the first Christian celebrity, in a sense. And he's saying, but apart from that, I am among you. I am doing the work. We have the same work. And that is to be an elder, a priest in Christ's church, to tend the flock. So, tend the flock. Don't know who that is. Peter says that in order to exercise faithful leadership in the church, you must first be willing to perform the work that you are called to do. And not just that, eager to do it. There's a little nuance there, to be willing to do something and then eager to do something. But to actually take joy in serving Christ. Take joy in serving Christ's body. Christ's temple, as Peter puts it. And also, lead as an example. This is key. What not to be. Don't be compelled. Don't seek gain. It's a lot of that is going on in the church and has gone on in the church throughout the ages. And don't be domineering. Namely, what you need to do is to follow, if you're going to set an example, follow the example of your God who went before you, your God who was himself the good shepherd. Christ is always our example. And in this respect, he is especially an example to those who would call themselves the shepherds of the people of God. As Jesus himself says, the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. If you're domineering, you aren't laying down your life for the sheep. If you're seeking gain, you especially are not laying down your life for the sheep. And if you feel compelled, you aren't going to do that either. So namely, in order to lay down your life for the sheep, you must love them. Love them to the extent that you would die for them, just as Christ died for you. And also be humble, counting yourself least among them. This is how you follow the example of the Good Shepherd. Jesus also said, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me." I come from an agricultural background, sort of being raised up in rural central Texas in Brownwood, and we kept a decent herd of cattle just outside of town. And I grew up working with these cattle and being around them, feeding them daily. But whenever I was there in the pasture with them, they were skittish. They would run away from me, or they just wouldn't do what I needed them to do because I wasn't the head honcho. That was my dad. My dad would drive into the pasture in his truck, and they would come running to him. They knew when the boss man was there. They knew they were about to get fed. They knew their horn. They knew my dad's horn. And when my dad got out of the truck, they weren't skittish. They weren't afraid of him. In fact, they knew his voice. These are cows. To the extent where I knew if we were in the truck together, if the cattle were around, I would not go out to open the gate, as is typical of the passenger in a farm. Because my dad didn't want to scare the cows. He would go out, and they knew him. So really, Jesus is saying, if you want to lead, if you want to be a good pastor, your sheep have to know you. They have to know your voice. They have to be familiar with you. They have to trust you. So be among them, serve them. And then you will be following the example of the Good Shepherd. And the cows still don't like me. I've been kicked a lot of times. Okay, and finally, Peter is definitely coming from a very familiar place, because Jesus once sat him down on the shore of Lake Galilee, and this is in John chapter 21. He said, this is what happened. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly I say to you, when you were young, you guarded yourself and walked where you would. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish to go." This he said to show by what death he was to glorify God. And after this he said to him, "Follow me." Feed my sheep, follow me. This is what is expected of the elders, and really, not just of the elders, but of all Christians. Anyone who would follow after the Good Shepherd, follow him. And by following him doesn't mean just paying lip service, but actually following him in his example of humility and of love, of taking joy in suffering, and in hoping not in this life, but in the exaltation to come in the next life. And Peter proceeds with sort of his final instructions. He says, be humble. Humility is the essential preparation for those who want to receive God's blessing, because God himself humbled himself in the form of a human being, taking on our nature. Therefore, we humble ourselves before God. The exaltation, as I said, will come in the next life. Our time is not to be exalted now. Remember, do not be domineering. Do not seek gain. Do not lord yourself over others. Serve one another, and you will be exalted in the next life. And then cast your anxieties, cast your cares on him. This can be easier said than done. A lot of anxiety in the world. A lot of anxiety in our daily lives for us, for our health, for our loved ones, for our friends, for what's going to happen tomorrow. It's okay to be anxious, but not to dwell on that anxiety and make it an idol. Rather, cast those anxieties on Christ himself. As Andrea said, Peter tells us that we have a guide and leader, and that if we act according to his instructions, we shall keep ourselves pure and spotless. A cure for our anxiety? Do what Jesus told us to do. And we can have faith that God will fulfill his promises. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. N.T. Wright sort of touches on this, and he mentions C.S. Lewis. Some people think about the devil with, a pitchfork and horns, and they just find it completely silly and decide not to believe in him. And he also says some people fall into the trap of thinking that the devil is on their heels at every single moment and problem. That all difficulties arise from the devil specifically. Both are sort of wrong tasks to take. But the devil can pounce and jump on you if you allow it. If you allow sin to enter into your life, or if you allow your current sufferings to waver your faith. So it's important to stand strong, to be sober-minded, and watch. Because Peter's been very clear that your adversity and your adversary aren't going anywhere. But if you remain resilient and firm in your faith, you will be victorious, because Christ was victorious before you. As Hilary of Arles said, there is a world of difference between God and the devil. If you resist God, he will destroy you. But if you resist the devil, you will destroy him. The devil is powerless to a faithful believer, because Christ resides in us. Everybody tracking? Questions? I'll leave you with this from St. Augustine. Who could avoid encountering the teeth of this lion if the lion from the tribe of Judah had not conquered? Christ conquered for us. We can take comfort in that and remain watchful as we follow Christ in our lives, hoping always for our own glorification in the next. So that's Peter. Now I've been instructed to tell you, do not read 2 Peter. Unless you want to read 2 Peter, but we are not going to be discussing it next week. Next week we're talking about Jude, which is a very short book of the Bible, and that's what we're going to be completing this crossword study on. So if you're preparing for next week, skip over 2 Peter if you want, and work on Jude, and we will be talking about that then. St. Jude is the patron of lost causes. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that in here. Just kidding. I hope you all have a good night, and we'll see you next week.